Good afternoon. We are continuing our discussion on the Vengeance of Vertigo. And before that, we have the chance to welcome Mr. Alexander Tommy, who will present Fanon and Capitalism. Oui. Thank you, Alex. Now, we can start our discussion on the Vengeance of Vertigo. You will see the slides in course link, but I would like to work today with the text as opposed to just presenting the slides. Maybe it will be better for you in terms of learning by yourself. Section 3, Jurisprudential Dreamwork, it's in page 133. And the first paragraph of that section, the last sentence is the thesis. It says, I'm not asserting historical continuity of courtroom strategies. The historical continuity of the Dred Scott case and the BLA, which is Black Liberation Army trials, isn't a continuity of performance, but a continuity of position, which means that Black people before the act of emancipation were socially dead, and Black people after the act of emancipation are still socially dead in the US. Now in page 135, Wilderson discussed the Dred Scott trial and the Judge Taney's verdict. He says that Taney's used imaginary and fantastic formulations, and he also talks about process of condensation and displacement to map colonialism in the body of indigenism. So the quotation from Taney's verdict proves that there is a fantasy of immigration. So Taney says Indian governments were regarded and treated as foreign governments, as much so as if an ocean had separated the red men from the white, and their freedom has constantly been acknowledged from the time of the first emigration to the English colonies to the present day by the different governments which succeeded each other. Okay. Moving on. Section 4, In Year of Mourning, which is page 137. You have the thesis in the first paragraph again. Where does it start? It says, this resonance of form is found in the way BLA autobiographical narratives and police confessions narrate violent events, and it is most pronounced when Panthers, BLA, and BLA soldiers narrate the violence levied against their bodies. It is as though the writer, who until that point in the narrative has demonstrated political sophistication, complexity, and okay, it's a long quote. unique capacity to muse on the socioeconomic woes of Black people writ large is suddenly struck with aphasia or reduced to the most unadorned and empirical patterns of speech when dramatizing assault on his body. So he sees similarities in the style of writing between the Black activists or Black fighters' autobiographies and the signed confessions that you do in police station. That's suspicious, according to Wilderson. And in page 142, it's in the first paragraph in page 142, in which it says that it's impossible to mourn the pained bodies. So that's why I think that you should read page 107 and 142 for the thesis. Est-ce que tu peux remettre la lumière, bébé? Ok, c'est pas grave, tu peux laisser. C'est pas grave, bébé, comme tu veux. Tu voulais quoi? Ok, I'm sorry. Ok. Donc, 140. Wilderson says, I have a lot of noise around me, I'm so sorry. Wilderson says in page 140 that in 140, Wilderson talks about the context surrounding Bukhari's arrest. Bukhari was a Black liberation activist too. But still, he has to say that in the discourse of this activist, you can see some porno chopping Black victims, as if the suffering, the Black mutilation, death is a spectacle. So he says in the last paragraph of last lines of the page 140, in this way, narratives of Black suffering mimic not only the narrative strategies of police confessions, but the editing strategies of Hollywood cinema as well, editing strategies in which spectators are treated to a scene of Black mutilation and death, and once the body is inert, the film cuts to a scene which suspends reflection on that mutilation and death. So you can see that spectacle is a word that is often used by Wilderson, and it seems to be connected to collective catharsis. And by the way, every time Wilderson says in other words and in this way, it's important to pay extra attention because this is where the important ideas are. So The way Wilderson introduced these important ideas are, in other words. It starts with in other words, yeah. And page 141 is important because in the first paragraph that starts with in black skin, white mask, it talks about the collective catharsis as described by Fanon. And the second paragraph, it talks about lynching, which is also a key word, I would say, for people who are interested with collective catharsis. So I would say if you are interested in a paper on collective catharsis, look for spectacle, collective catharsis, and lynching. And also at the end of the text, at the end of the page, it talks about the tyranny of closure, which is another way of saying looking always for solution before properly analyzing the problem. Another way to say that would be the moral of the story. As if when I noticed that some people in the class, when they make an intervention, they say, so that's why it is important that we do this or that. So that's what I would describe as the moral of the story or the solution, as if every time you talk about the problem, you must provide a solution to be heard. And so this is a tyranny of closure for Wilderson. Therefore, page 141 is very important to read and reread. Now, section 5, the war within, 143, 144. Oh, you have, again, the word, another word for people who look for collective catharsis is ritual. So it talks about ritual murders. And I would say that is something that you can connect to collective catharsis. So it's another keyword that you can use in your research. And so in this paragraph, the first paragraph, it says that Black self is in perpetual war with itself. Black self is divided. And then 145. You have important ideas that come back. Okay, Wilderson comes back to the judge, Taney, and his fantasies of immigration. Instead of saying colonization, Taney prefers to say immigration. So this is a fantasy for Wilderson. And also it talks about freedom for Black people, which would be eradication of the generative mechanisms of Black suffering. So in the middle of the text, middle of the page, it says, eradication of the generative mechanisms of Black suffering would mean the end of the world, and they would find themselves peering into an abyss or incomprehensible transition between epistemes, that is, the body of ideas that determine that knowledge that is intellectually certain at any particular time. So Black freedom is a deconstruction, an epistemological deconstruction, which is an idea that we we said and said again last week and the week before. It's a recurrent idea, important idea from Wilderson. And another idea, very important, is at the end of the text that when it starts with finally, it says, if we push Marriott's finding to the wall, it becomes clear. So Marriott is another Afro-pessimist writer, and Wilderson has a lot of admiration for him. And Marriott used a lot of psychoanalytical perspective, a lot of Lacan in his text. And I would like to suggest to read Marriott, but it's incredibly difficult to read. I read him last summer for an article of 40 pages. It took me 1 week. It's very hard. And so Wilderson admires very much Marriott. So finally, if we push Marriott's findings to the wall, it becomes clear that eradication, do we say eradication or eradication of the generative mechanisms of Black suffering is also not in the interest of Black revolutionaries. So I think it's an important idea because it, how do we say, close the circle? Because we said that, because we said that workers, working class and white women, junior partners in general, cannot understand the suffering of Black people. But Black people themselves are not able to express their suffering properly, according to this Vengeance of Vertigo. And Wilderson goes further and says that it's not even in the interest of Black people to make themselves free. Why? Do I explain why somewhere? Okay, maybe. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Okay, it's not. I don't explain that in the slides, but it has to do with Lacan identification and repression. I won't explain here, but if you want me to explain, I will explain it to you individually. Because at this point, I think you don't care. Okay, so 146, what do we have? Yeah, so as I said, this is the explanation why it's not in the interest of Black people to make themselves free. Because of the psychoanalytical desire to destroy the Black imago and love a white ideal. So this is something they share with white people. They bond with white people over the phobia of Black people. So you see that somehow you can connect that to Fanon. I hope some of you will see that. Okay, and okay. 146, 147. Okay, what else? Recapitulate. So the conclusion, the first lines, the second sentence, it says, what pacifist detractors forget, however, is that for Gramsci, the strategy of a war of position is one of commanding civic and political spaces, one trenched at a time in order to turn those spaces into pedagogic locals for the dispossessed, and this process is one which combines peaceful as well as violent tactics as it moves the struggle closer to an all violent assault on the state. So therefore, violence is ethically acceptable, according to Wilderson, if we use Gramsci's perspective, because violence is a tactic. Or, yeah. So it's not just violence for the sake of violence. As we saw with Wretched of the Earth, violence was a praxis. Okay? I hope it's clear. Violence is a praxis. It's not really because it's cathartic. But you think that Fanon defends violence just because it cleans, it detoxifies the colonizer, the colonized. But Fanon repeats very often that violence is a praxis of violence. So in the same way, Wilderson talks about violence as a tactic, not violence for the sake of violence. Okay, it's not revenge. What else? 147. So 147, first lines, he still continue talking about his support for violence, for the fight for Black freedom, and what he wants for Black people in general is the restoration of the inner ear. And with the restoration of inner ear, hopefully we will have a more accurate political analysis of the problem. And so he finished the paper with though I have erred in this article on the side of paradigm as opposed to praxis, and caution against assuming that we know or can know what the harvest of their sacrifice was, I believe we are better political thinkers, if not actors, as a result of what they did with their bodies, even if we still don't know what to do with ours. So, he doesn't agree with everything that the BLA did. He was very critical in his analysis. But the last sentence of his text is to express gratitude towards BLA, Weather Underground, Black Panthers, for their courageous actions, because it helped us create a more accurate political thinking, even though we still don't know what to do to gain the freedom. I think that's all I want to say. Thank you. And next week, please come prepared, just as a favor for me. Read The Narcissistic Slave from page 55 to 73. Now we are in another book called Red, what is the name of the book? White and Black. Anyways, that's the book that Wilderson published in 2010. So thank you and goodbye.